Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek Saxena and in this session we'll talk about governance portion of GS paper 2. Basically the central theme of this session is to identify the thrust areas in governance, what has been the trend in the last few years of UPSC from this particular section, and we'll see how and from where the questions have been made. So let's dig deeper into this. So for the ease of candidates, what I've done is I have divided the whole syllabus belonging to the governance section into 9 parts. So the very first part is about local government. So a lot of purists may argue that this particular section belongs to the polity and not governance as such. But if we'll look at the questions which have been asked, they have a certain governance tilt. And mind you, governance and polity are somewhat interrelated in the sense that one goes with the other. Any act, any bill, any major paradigm structural shift which happens in the government paraphernalia might have consequences on governance, whether it is about governance within the government system or whether it is governance without the government system for citizens, for certain stakeholders or a certain segment of our society. So that is why I've included a local government as a part of the whole governance syllabus, because the questions have been such. This was in particular for local government, but mind you, for our understanding, we have divided the whole syllabus into various silos and heads, but largely the questions have been interdisciplinary in nature. So questions have been interdisciplinary in nature. When I say interdisciplinary, a question might refer to bureaucracy and, let us say, poverty as well. So it is very important for a candidate to judge that which particular term or which particular concept is the pivot of that question around which certain other concepts are weaved. So largely the questions you will find are interdisciplinary in nature, and they will involve certain keywords which will tell you that what is the focus and what is the locus of the question, and accordingly you can answer. So quickly getting back to the syllabus, as you can see, these all are the syllabus details which are marked in our syllabus, and I've categorized them into heads. So with regards to pressure groups, NGOs, self-help groups, various other groups, associations, donor, and somewhat like farmer organizations, trader organizations, labor organizations, they all act as pressure groups in one sense or the other. So I've clubbed that part under pressure groups. At the same time, the government time and again comes with various policies, for example, education policy, health policy, which have governance orientation, and therefore policies and interventions. And the next head, which I think is one of the central heads of the governance, is transparency, accountability, and e-governance. Because ultimately the whole governance exercise is about openness, is about efficiency of service delivery, is about citizen at the core, and citizen availing those services and getting those services efficiently. Then the next head is about social sector. When we say social sector, we talk about a very broad area wherein certain benchmark public goods such as health, education, sanitation, etc., poverty, and mind you, all these things are interrelated. Poverty is related to education, health, and vice versa. So a candidate, while answering the governance portion of GS paper 2, needs to keep in mind the very multidisciplinary nature, the very contemporary nature of the subject. At the same time, certain fundamentals of a particular domain. So when we talk about health, let us say, so we have a public health and private health. We have a certain structure: primary health center, secondary health center, super specialty health centers, educations, universities, schools, primary schools, and then branch it out. For example, education for women. For example, education for disabled or divyangs. So that is how this tree, expand its roots, basically touching almost every aspect of human life. But don't fret over it, in the sense that this is something which is not a web or a complex equation which one cannot decipher. It is very simplistic in terms. If you just go by an order, if you have a categorical arrangement to channelize your thoughts, and then you can simply answer any question with a contemporary development, current affairs, and certain basics of theory. So, uh, moving away from social sector, we have the next very important aspect related to poverty and hunger, which is explicitly mentioned in the syllabus. So, a great emphasis should be laid on this. Then the operative aspect of governance, that is civil services. So it says that role of civil services in a democracy. So when we say such an abstract, sentence, that role of civil services in a democracy, we basically try and examine all the aspects, whether it is about civil services from within or the operative aspect of civil services. So it will involve bureaucracy, reforms, citizen, bureaucracy, interaction. So all those themes are touched upon. We'll get into those themes as we'll move on with the trend analysis. And another very important section is welfare schemes. I'll come to regulatory bodies just after welfare schemes, because there's a reason. So welfare schemes generally are considered very, very popular for prelims. That we have certain welfare schemes, Manrega, National Rural Health Mission, Livelihoods Mission, and so on and so forth. But mind you, these welfare schemes are used at times in isolation or at times in conjunction with an underlying reality. So there might be questions regarding, let us say, rural employment, and in reference to that, Manrega might find a mention in the question. Even if Manrega does not find a mention in the question itself, when we talk about rural employment, Manrega is a pillar of providing some sort of employment to the rural population. So you should be well aware of these schemes, and they are not just limited to the prelims. They are equally relevant for mains, as they provide you assertions and reasoning to cement your arguments. So this makes welfare schemes very important, because welfare schemes span across sectors. Sometimes they are very much citizen targeted schemes, and sometimes they might come in the form of a policy, let us say national electronics policy. So it is considered to be relevant for a sector, and then that sector will have its own dimensions. right? So they might fall under welfare schemes, they might fall under government interventions. So highly interdisciplinary in nature. But once you learn to connect the dots, the whole governance is very simple. Now coming to regulatory bodies. Again, some of the purists may argue that certain regulatory body, whether they are statutory, regulatory, quasi-judicial bodies or such bodies, they fall under the realm of polity. But then there are questions regarding independence, regarding efficiency, regarding relevance of these very bodies. So you might have bodies like Backward Classes Commission, Human Rights Commission, Women's Commission. Okay. So while keeping in mind all those things, we should relate them with the governance, and hence they become a very indispensable part of the whole governance discourse. So mind you, when we talk about these bodies and all these things are interrelated. Okay, so that is why I've clubbed these things with the governance syllabus. At the same time, it is very essential for us to remember that not every area might be touched upon by the examination for a particular year. There might be certain areas based on some contemporary development which might feature more weight in terms of the questions that are asked. So let us look at how this marks distribution or weight distribution, as I call it, is there. So as you can see with this particular slide, that out of 250, almost 50% of the marks used to get allocated initially. So these were still early years of the new syllabus and a lot of things were there to explore. And when I say marks distribution, it is very, very essential for us to understand that what section with what kind of marks that are given to a candidate to solve. So in 2015 and 2016, one major trend was that all the questions carried equal weightage. That is about 12.5 marks. Right? So one solid trend was that all the questions carried equal weightage. About 50% or 40% used to be asked from governance section of the entire GS paper 2. So your approach was, the approach could have been very, very linear in the sense that, okay, 12.5 marks, so 150 to 200 words are enough, right? But the scenario has changed. Since 2017, no question has been there for 12.5 marks. To better judge the capability of the candidate, UPSC has diversified the weightage of the questions either to 10 marker or 15 marker. And there is a rider that it is no certainty that UPSC will not revert to the older system. But for our analysis, it is very important to go on predictable lines. So the questions which are asked from the governance section will largely be either 10 marker or 15 markers. And if you will see the distribution, you can safely say that the average is around 100. So around 40% of GS paper 2 would deal with governance section. So this is a big chunk. This can make or break your chances of getting selected. Hence, this section assumes greater significance because 40% straight away from a single chunk certain sectors, certain schemes, certain approaches, and you are through with it. At the same time, the question distribution 5, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, the 15 markers and the 10 markers. So almost equal weightage. It's not that the weightage is lopsided, that you will have a lot of 10 markers and one or two here and there 15 markers, or vice versa. So it is very important to maintain a balanced point of view where you are ready to write things in certain details, where you will have to scratch the surface to a certain limit, but not too much nor too little. So that is another trend which we can take away with us, or a point which we can drive home. First, that almost 40%. Second, that we need to have a very measured approach, not too much and not too little, when it comes to putting the content and writing the answers. Now see, this is the question distribution year on year as per themes. So you will see as per this chart that in certain years, certain areas were left untouched, and then certain areas were there which had a huge weightage, at times 2 questions being asked. So that makes certain things like transparency, accountability, e-governance, poverty and hunger, social sector, pressure groups and welfare schemes very, very relevant. It's not that other sections are not relevant, but here the central point is that these sections are in a sort of indispensable for any examination, any year which UPSC conducts. That like these sections will be there, and then the whole paper can be garnished with some other isolated sections. For example, one may evolve civil services. There was a lot of talk about lateral appointments and reforms in the civil services. So civil services was asked in 2020. At the same time, you will have to be intelligent enough that there was a hiatus in the questions being asked from this section. So in 2020, a question was asked from this section itself. Similarly, local government, you have one question almost every year, barring 2016. So you had Panchayati Raj reforms, you had reforms related to the local government in the union territories of Jammu and Kashmir, a new system coming up. So that makes these things important. So that is how you connect contemporary realities, with the question and with the section you are studying. Poverty and hunger. These are central issue. Mind you, 2 questions were asked in 2020 and social sector. Economy was largely on a downward spiral since 2017. The picture was not very rosy. Employment, poverty, continued expansion of Manrega year on year after budget suggested that this particular section, social sector, poverty and hunger, they assume significance. And hence, that significance reflected in the question paper. As part of trend analysis, we are here not to predict the paper. We are neither here to predict the specific topic which might be asked. We are here to see how topics, examinations, and the contemporary movements, in the society have moved with each other, and get some idea that from where we can take some point home, which may help either in our answer, right, and which may give some supporting arguments or the arguments even if it is criticism related to a certain reality in our answer. So it always helps. It always helps to cement your point. So pressure groups, transparency, accountability, e-governance, poverty and hunger, all these are central themes. They have been recurring and they will recur. Because governance is all about citizens. Governance is all about citizen at the core of government functioning. Government and citizen interaction and the interface. So a citizen interacts with government at multiple interfaces. Whether it is a one-way flow structure where government provides certain benefits to the citizens, or it is the reverse flow where government seeks, where the citizen seeks certain services from the government. So this distribution gives you an idea that at times the government may lay a lot of stress on certain areas. Okay. So things like transparency, accountability, efficiency, effectiveness, corruption, service delivery, all those things are very important. And mind you, they can be interrelated as well. So e-governance might be related to transparency and accountability, right? E-governance might be related to social sector. Pressure groups might be related to policies and interventions. There might be a certain pressure group which is campaigning for something, and then you have government heeding or government being sensitive to that pressure group. For example, way back there was something called right to education. So there was a lot of movement on education for all, and ultimately the government, when it in its wisdom felt that it was feasible, a rights-based approach to giving education was adopted. Okay. Then there might be certain things related to local government and accountability. How can panchayats be empowered via use of information and communication technology? Information and communication technology or e-governance can bring in the much needed transparency and accountability into the local government system. So ideally, if we look at it from the purest perspective, the question belongs to local government, but it has a governance orientation. So this interdisciplinary nature runs across years and across themes, and you'll get enlightened about this at a far more deeper level when we'll discuss the various questions and the various themes. So let us move on. So this was the topic wise distribution. It is for all of you to see that what are the thrust areas, what has been the pattern from which the questions have been asked. Okay. Now let us look at the topic wise marks. So barring this 12.5 markers, which one might choose to ignore, you will see that almost equal number of questions have been asked from 15 markers and 10 markers, that is 17 and 15. So again, cementing our point that a balanced approach to answers, not preparing for too long answers, at the same time not preparing for very crisp answers is the need of the hour while preparing the governance section, where in a balance of the theory underlying reality as well as contemporary orientation and a future way forward is the key to crack this particular section and come out with flying colors. So you can see this. Again, a heavy weightage to this thing. So largely 10 markers have revolved around transparency, accountability, e-governance. 15 markers which require a certain policy, a certain theoretical bedrock has revolved around poverty and hunger, because you'll have to tell about the journey of why we are so poor, or what has been the government interventions, Garibi Hatao, Manrega and all that. So they involve a certain detailed examination, as well as welfare schemes. A welfare scheme, as I said, might not be asked in isolation. For example, there was a question on wash scheme. So this particular scheme was not asked in isolation. It was in conjunction with a certain concept of health and sanitation. So that is how things are. Okay. And then again, local government has a balanced approach. Social sector, again, the shorter answers. So that is how it is. Regulatory bodies, very few questions, but a year may come wherein a lot of debate around regulatory bodies, constitutional bodies and other bodies have been there regarding their functioning, regarding their efficacy, regarding their relevance, regarding their independence. So mind you, keep in mind all these adjectives which I am using, because those adjectives form the core of the question. It will have a certain mention of a body or a particular entity and the dimension which it wants to explore. So this is the marks distribution for you. Moving on. Now what I've done is I have analyzed the questions from last 6 years and presented you a theme which has revolved, which is there in the questions with regards to every dimension. So local government has been asked in the dimensions of education, health, general governance in terms of the efficiency of the local bodies, the transparency, the benefits which the local body brings if it works effectively at the ground level, and reservation of seats. You are aware that in local bodies you have seats reserved for the certain sections of our society, women, etc. So all those dimensions might be touched upon. Similarly, in pressure groups, heavy emphasis has been on NGOs and self-help groups, and that too in various dimensions. So for example, self-help group, you are aware that they are largely women organizations which provide some sort of empowerment, financial security to women. So there might be a question which is related to self-help groups and the independence of women, or eradication of poverty. So interlinking. So UPSC has laid deep stress on these NGOs, SHGs, and a lot of questions have been asked covering these dimensions. Pressure groups in general. So you had a question regarding farmers organization as well. So you had a new labor code which might come up. So you might have questions related to labor organizations. Okay. So this is how we extrapolate our thinking and prepare the areas. Policies and interventions. Development, environment, liberalization, privatization and globalization. So you might have a certain aspect being asked in these contexts and even more. So these are the contexts regarding previous years, and more things can be added, which I will detail in a while. Transparency and accountability. Whistleblower, e-governance, citizens charter, information and communication technology. All those things have been asked. Poverty and hunger, microfinance, directly questions on poverty and hunger. So you will have things like human development being looked at, human development indicators being referred to, some sort of a human development index being referred to. So all those dimensions get covered here. Civil services. With regards to civil services, you will see that 3 questions have been asked and 2 of them have revolved around reforms and 1 has revolved around the bureaucracy and development dynamics. Right? So you might have a question, in an area in which bureaucracy and let us say LPG may be linked. Okay. So all those things can be there. With regards to regulatory body section, largely the questions have revolved around the independence, the impartiality. Okay. Welfare schemes. In welfare schemes, policies, commissions like NCW, all those things can be asked. You had a new bill, some amendment, so all those things can be there. Then again, in conjunction with other aspects, for example, WASH scheme with health can be asked. So these are the thrust areas which you should remember and more. Okay. Now let us move forward with certain trends and let me outline certain aspects for you. Certain themes which you should always remember, in which you will have to relate all these 9 bifurcations with each of them. So it will give you a very wider and very comprehensive perspective. Environmental perspective, gender perspective, disadvantaged like SC, ST, OBC, backward sections basically, EBC, economically backward, right? And within that, obviously, there will be questions on reservation, representation, inclusivity, etc. So keep in mind all the adjectives that I am using because they will help you not only understand the question and decipher it better, they'll also help you writing answers if you mention all those adjectives at the right places and in the right context. So certain themes, environment, gender, disadvantage. When I say gender, it's not just women, mind you. It's also about the third gender. You had a transgenders bill which was passed a few years ago, a couple of years ago, I guess. So the third gender as well. The inclusivity aspect, something related to, let us say, tribals. Okay, from within the social sector. Then again, a theme related to transparency, accountability, effectiveness, efficiency, all those things. When it comes to reforms from within the bureaucracy and from aspects, let us say, voluntary disclosures, citizens charter, right? So these are the major themes. At the same time, we have identified that transparency, accountability, e-governance, all those are the highlight areas. So in a certain reality, you can link education and ICT, information communication technology, or e-governance, Diksha platform. So a question might be asked regarding education and e-governance, and then you can mention Diksha platform. So it has to be a very seamless amalgamation of a certain reality fact as well as analysis to write good answers later. First, to understand the questions and what all you can include in that question. So transparency, accountability, efficiency, effectiveness. Then again, an aspect which is very core to the whole governance architecture in any country is citizen centricity. When we say citizen centricity, means citizen at the core, weaving the entire approach for the betterment of citizens or for the benefit of citizens. So citizen centricity is another very important aspect, a theme which is a takeaway. Okay. So largely the trends have touched upon these areas. So whether it is SHGs, NGOs, citizens charter, bureaucracy, one more addition is bureaucracy and citizen interface. How bureaucracy helps bring in better transparency, or how a lack of efficient bureaucracy has kept India's growth timid. Questions on these lines. How bureaucracy can be reformed. So you had lateral entry, you had things like Mission Karm Yogi, you had other structural reforms within the bureaucracy. So all those things are very, very important. The orientation of the bureaucracy, let us say, in the pre-LPG era and post-LPG era. So all these themes assumes central significance. So let us go back to the breakup, and let me underline certain things for you which are of paramount importance after we have seen how the questions have been asked. So the local government mentions about devolution of powers and finances. Challenges, right? So a challenge, let us say, posed by bureaucracy. The devolution of powers, participation, inclusivity, reservation for women. Let us say setting up of a criteria that one should be 12th pass at least to stand in election for local bodies. The debate around it, the pros and cons, the way forward, right? With regards to pressure groups, enough questions have been asked about NGOs and SHGs and the dimension that these NGOs and SHGs touch. For example, there was a debate about funding of various NGOs, so you can have that aspect as well coming up. You can have something related to corporate social responsibility, right? Associations like farmer associations, donor associations, institutional and other stakeholders, how the ministries and state governments at various levels coordinate. For example, you have a very strong SHG movement going up in Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, etc. Okay. Then policies and interventions, development in various sectors. So a question might be asked from policy orientation. For example, in 2020, a question was asked on education policy and sustainable development goals, right? So those dimensions can be asked. Then coming to transparency and accountability and e-governance. So a question on citizens charter has been asked. Various e-governance applications. So you might have applications. Let us say there is a thing called Umang platform. A question might be asked related to this and the service delivery. Okay. What are the measures, institutional measures, how accountability and transparency is being strengthened, or what lacks the transparency and accountability mechanism, or what ails the transparency and accountability mechanism, and how it can be further strengthened. So a question can have a discussion orientation, a question can have an elaboration orientation, a question can have a critical orientation. But the central theme will revolve around these very ideas. and according to the orientation of the question, you will have to modify your answer. Then again, education and health. As I said, education was asked in 2020, so it was in a way related to this section and this section as well, right? So interdisciplinary nature, we have spoken enough about it. With regards to poverty and hunger, questions have been asked related to various dimensions, that how poverty and hunger reinforce each other, how lack of education leads to increase in poverty, so all those things. Civil services has largely confined to reforms and bureaucracy and citizen interaction, but there can be more dimensions which can be explored. For example, civil services and the changing scenario due to LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization, a more citizen friendly bureaucracy, a faceless bureaucracy. You might have systems which are now at present have a manned component. That says how can those systems be taken online, involving e-governance, wherein the ills with which the bureaucracy comes, elitist character, impunity, etc., those can be done away with. So all those dimensions can be explored, right? Welfare schemes, then again law, you had something related to whistleblowers, so again that relates to transparency and accountability, but laws also. Institutions and bodies, you had something called amendments to the information commissioners, CIC roles, etc. So all those things can be asked, right? So these are the dimensions and the thrust areas which we need to touch. Largely, we need to remember that governance section can only be tackled with a hybrid approach of strong theoretical bedrock and contemporary and analytical reasoning. At the same time, the questions are going to be either 10 markers or 15 markers. The trend will be that social sector, transparency, accountability, new initiatives from e-governance, poverty, hunger, alignment with sustainable goals, global realities can feature. For example, just a common feature can be SHGs and role in COVID, right? So those dimensions can be explored. So an existing theoretical construct with a contemporary reality. Since the question is of hybrid nature, you will have to adopt that amalgamated approach to answer it well. So that's pretty much about the trend. The main motive of this particular session was to give you an orientation, the thrust areas which are asked, and the areas which can likely, which have a huge potential to be asked, and how an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary questioning has increasingly been adopted by the UPSC. So we'll keep revisiting the ideas discussed in this particular videos as and when we'll take up the previous year's questions. For now, this is Abhishek Saxena signing off. Thank you.